Good evening, folks, and welcome to another Cyclone Chasers Cyclone video update today, the 13th of March 2015. My name's Chris Nitzo. This update is sponsored by our major sponsor, Campbell Scientific Australia, when measurements matter. Latest on Severe Tropical Cyclone Olwyn. Severe Tropical Cyclone Olwyn passed just to the west of Carnarvon earlier today. Wind speeds of around about 150 kilometres an hour in that region. It passed just to the west of Exmouth as well last night, with wind speeds up to 180 kilometres an hour there overnight last night, and passed pretty well over the top of Coral Bay. It has maintained its intensity. It's sort of drifted between land and then offshore and then back to land. It has a very good environment for intensification, and it's being offset. So the fact that it's got some land interaction is being offset by the fact that the environmental parameters around it are very conducive for the system. Now look, it is expected to weaken as we go into tonight, but it's still expected to be probably a borderline Cat 2 by the time it gets to Kalbarri early in the morning tomorrow morning. So we're expecting it over the top of Kalbarri at about 1 or 2 a.m. tomorrow, and then it continues southeastwards to Jurien Bay, possibly even remaining a Cat 1 as far as Jurien Bay before finally passing to the near east of Perth. So the cyclone warning is extended all the way down to Jurien Bay, just in case it maintains that Category 1 intensity as we go into middle of the morning tomorrow. Expected to pass by Perth around about lunchtime tomorrow or just after. You can see here, despite the fact that it has had so much land interaction, the system has remarkably managed to stay together. It's around about in the northern tip here of Shark Bay. It's going to push in a south-southeast direction, so we're expecting another landfall here over the next 3 to 4 hours. It's really only been the last hour or two where we've started to see that eye fill in, and so I think we are getting down to about a Category 2 at the moment based on the current satellite interpretation analysis. So don't be surprised if over the next couple of hours the Bureau does downgrade this to Category 2. As you can see here, the eye has filled in. It is at the top here of Shark Bay and tracking away, or tracking to the south-southeast. Was a wild night in Learmonth and Exmouth. So Learmonth, by the way, is the airport that's located around about 5-10 k's south of the actual town itself. The town itself is 5 to 10 k north. So Learmonth is the closest we've got to Exmouth's observations, and we saw there that the wind speeds got up to about 100 kilometres an hour plus from about 9:45 in the afternoon, or 9:47 in the evening, and then they never got back under 100 kilometres an hour until 4:55 a.m. So it was one hell of a wild night. They peaked at around about 180 kilometres an hour from the northeast at around about 1:30 in the morning, and then they had another go at 180 kilometres an hour around 2:20, 2:30 that morning as well. The minimum pressure recorded was around that 969 mark. We had a 969.5 here and a 969.3 here. So the eye did not pass over the top of Exmouth or Learmonth, but it passed very close to the west of the area. Now, the strongest winds were coming in from the northeast here, because if we take a quick look at the map of where Learmonth and Exmouth are, we can see that from the northeast the area is pretty exposed. So if it gets winds coming in from the northeast, they come straight off the water, or the northeast even. They come straight off the water and in towards the actual observation site. Now, remembering, of course, that the observation site is actually here. The town is actually, as I mentioned to you, about 10 k further to the north. So we can see the circulation now tracking into Shark Bay. We can see that Carnarvon is now located to the north of the circulation centre. If we just take a quick look at Carnarvon's obs from this afternoon, because they passed very, very close to the eye as well, we can see that wind speeds began getting up over 100 kilometres an hour at around about 10:12 a.m. this morning, and we ended up seeing the eye pass directly to their west at around about 12:57 or 1 p.m. in the afternoon. And then as they've gone to the northern edge eye wall, they've still maintained some fairly strong winds here. We're still getting winds up to 125 to 130 kilometres an hour on the northern eye wall. But you can see the strongest winds were located just after the eye passed to their west, and they were copping 141, 146 kilometres an hour there from the northeast. Minimum pressure in Carnarvon got down to about 976 at around about 2 p.m. at WA time. Unfortunately, Denham doesn't report. It only reports every 6 hours, which is, or twice a day, in fact, at 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, which is a bit disappointing. But I'm sure the Bureau internally have got Denham reporting much more frequently than that. But the public updates for Denham only come out at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Interestingly, at 9 a.m. this morning, also in the Gascoyne Junction, the weather station, they're reporting southeasterly winds at 111 kilometres an hour, but we'll never really know, I don't think, exactly how high they got, unless the Bureau make that information public. As the cyclone begins tracking into Shark Bay, we can now see that Shark Bay's observations are increasing too in terms of wind strengths. We can see now the latest a gust of 89 kilometres an hour. We wouldn't expect to see the type of intensity that we've seen in Exmouth, but we might see similar intensities that we just saw in Carnarvon here at Shark Bay, and then after that the intensity should drop of this system. But you can certainly see the pressure here, 994 hectopascals, and dropping fairly quickly. Alrighty, so next cab off the rank is Kalbarri, and Kalbarri will start to see gale force winds at around about 11 p.m. tonight, or 10 p.m. tonight, give or take an hour or two. And then those gale force winds will continue. Now we can see here it's pretty close to the eye of the cyclone. Now if the eye of the cyclone passes just east or just west, very similar type of experience is expected for Kalbarri as we get into early tomorrow morning. So that's at 2 a.m. You can see Kalbarri now located in the eye, and then by tomorrow, the winds, by tomorrow morning at 5 a.m., the winds have shifted to a more northwesterly direction. Now, one of the key things to note here is the dramatic decrease in intensity between what it is right now and what it will be by the time it gets over the top of Kalbarri. So you can see here now, it's certainly a solid Cat 2, possibly a very, very weak Cat 3, but certainly a solid Cat 2 as it's making landfall. And then it continues just off the coast. And as I said, by the time it gets to Kalbarri, probably a Cat 1. And you can start to see here the structure becoming much more loose in the system. And so we would expect that by the time it does get over the top of Perth, it's not packing anywhere near the sort of punch that it's packing at the moment. And by the way, for those of you wondering what time it's expected to get over Perth, it's around about lunchtime tomorrow. So any time from, the models do vary a little bit, any time from about 11 a.m. to about 4 p.m. is when it's expected to get near Perth or over the top of Perth. And if we take a look at the sort of effects that you're looking for in terms of rainfall, most of that rainfall will remain east of the actual centre of circulation. There will be showers and squally showers at that to the west. But if we just take a look at Perth coming up here, we can see that showers early tomorrow, and then the heavy stuff is located just east of the circulation centre as we go into tomorrow afternoon and tomorrow evening. System then continues to track here in a south to southeast direction and pops off the coast at around about Sunday early in the morning. And that will be the end of Sneaky Cyclone Olwyn. Like a thief in the night, he developed, he bombed while we were all watching Nathan and Pam, and he just did all of his damage. Excellent computer model agreement here by 10 a.m. tomorrow, the system lying just to the north of, or just around the Perth area, and then by around lunchtime it has hit Perth or gotten very, very close. There are slight variances and disagreements there, with a couple of them remaining it just to the west of Perth. Now, if that happens, if it does remain just to the west of Perth, that heavy area of rain is going to fall right over the top of the city itself. But at this stage, we're expecting a track slightly more west of that. So that heavy rain should be affecting areas east of Perth. Alright, let's head over to Annoying Cyclone Nathan. Annoying Cyclone Nathan has moved nowhere today and has maintained its almost stationary position. It will move to the east. In fact, it's probably starting to show signs that it wants to move east already. It is expected to move east out here into the Coral Sea, get out into the central Coral Sea, and then after that, things get interesting again. But look, because they're going to be out to about 3 to 5 days before things get interesting, actually closer to 5 to 6 days before things start to get interesting here with this cyclone. We're not going to cover that tonight because we've got too much to talk about with Pam. But folks, just be aware that the easterly track is not shown by every computer model. The initial track is, certainly. This track map from the Bureau, it has a very high degree of confidence. And overall, there's a fairly high degree of confidence that the system will track in an east-southeast, but then it's this area here. The system can start to track southwards, and some of the computer models in the longer term, and I purposefully haven't shown you the longer term because it complicates and confuses things, but some of the computer models in the longer term from this location in here then begin to drift the system back to the west, or drift the system back to the southwest, or drift the system back to the south and then southeast. So it does become quite a complex pattern then in the longer term, and that's why I purposefully have not shown you that, just because we don't want to complicate things just yet. Let's just assume that for the next 3 to 4 days the system will push away to the east as shown here, because there's a fairly high degree of confidence it's going to do that for the medium term, and then we'll worry about the longer term in a couple of days' time once we've got rid of Olwyn and Pam. Just to give you a quick squizzy of what he looks like, he's still struggling. You can see here there is a little bit of convection. There's good curved banding, so there's no doubt there's a cyclone there somewhere. It's just a matter of that it constantly gets sheared away to the west. Now that is starting to ease, and looking at this latest animation, particularly towards the end of the afternoon, we're starting to see a little bit more consolidation of that thunderstorm activity near the center of the system. The problem, of course, is that even with that consolidation of that storm activity, the actual cloud tops through the day have warmed, and until we see the cooling cloud tops again, we can't see this thing intensifying anytime soon. The Bureau also mentioning here that the westerly monsoon will become the driving steering influence of this thing, and it will do so for the next few days. So we are, as I said, very, very little disagreement between any computer model that it's going to push east over the next 3 to 4 days. After that, we'll talk about it soon in the next couple of days. What I will say, without being too cryptic, is a lot will depend on how far east it moves in the next 3 to 4 days. If it can remain a little bit closer to Queensland than the Bureau of Meteorology have out to day 5 here, they've got it out past 160. Look, by that stage, it's going to be a hard ask to get it back towards the Queensland coast. But if it can remain, say, around the 155 to 157 area after about 5 days, well, things will get very, very interesting in a hurry. But that's all I've got to say about that for now. Let's go on to Pam. Jesus, she is a beauty. Look at her. She's already raking some of these islands here in the inner eye wall. Port Vila is this island here. This island, oh, it's not actually the island, but Port Vila is located on the island here on the southwestern edge of that island. And the system, you can see now, Port Vila is getting close to the core of this just immensely intense tropical cyclone. This one has plagued the agencies, and it's plagued a lot of people because the current environmental steering flow suggests that the system should be adopting a track to the south-southeast. It is not adopting that track, and it has thrown everyone out. And that's why the track forecast from the JTWC and the Fijian Met Bureau have been quite a way off here. Now, by quite a way, I'm only talking 100-150 kilometres, but it's been outside the error margins. That was the key here. The error margins probably should have been wider to incorporate these areas 24 hours ago. As I mentioned to you in the update last night, the European ensemble was showing a disastrous scenario, and that scenario has actually played out. The European certainly was the Western outlier, but the European is a very highly accurate model in global tropics, and so it probably should have been accounted for in the forecast yesterday. Nevertheless, the forecasts have come good today. It's just a matter of has there been enough time for everyone to prepare on Port Vila. So we can see here the system has been tracking southwest. It does look like it might have just slowed down a little bit in the last hour or so. And that can only be a terrible thing for anyone in its path at the moment. If it starts to slow down here, that is dreadful for everyone. Because that just means these islands are just going to be in this inner eye wall for hours and hours and hours on end. Not only is this system so large, but the one positive it had going for it was that it was moving so freely and so quickly. And now it's just decided suddenly for the last hour or two to just stall. That is very, very concerning. If we take a look at it on a international scale or a regional scale, we can see just how large this system is, and we can see just how strong and powerful that eye looks, and how deep this inner convective banding is right here, right over the top of the main island of Efate. And further south we've got the islands of Erromango, Tanna, and Anetium just under that. So we've got a number of islands here that are almost like a domino here for the cyclone to track over the top of, because if it starts to track here south-southeast like it is supposed to do, and like everyone has been expecting it to do, it will eventually just almost skittle them like dominoes, one after the other, right along that path. So it's the worst case scenario path for all these people in the firing line. Now obviously Afate is the island with the most inhabitants. We've got 30,000 that live in Port Vila. Thankfully, a lot of the island is actually quite built up, particularly in the actual city itself. A lot of these structures are fairly strong. So we've obviously got some very low-lying islands just off the coast here. So these sort of islands here would be in a disastrous situation. So hopefully they have been evacuated. There's another one here that I just mentioned. I just had a look at called Hideaway Island. So very, very low-lying islands. They do obviously need to be evacuated, and I'm sure the authorities are all over that. Now, the big issue here obviously will become storm surge. There are a lot of low-lying properties right here on the bay, Melly Bay, and what we've got, if we just zoom right in here, you've got properties that really look out onto the beachfront, and you can see here that very low-lying escarpment here, right along that beachfront. And you know, this is obviously going to be a storm surge area, especially if I just zoom out here. Also, we've got a fairly low-lying creek there, Tidal Creek. You can see properties right along that beachfront there. Now, if I zoom out here and show you why this is going to be an issue for storm surge, if we take a look, other than the obvious, of course, if we take a look at the area itself, we've actually got a situation where the water can be funneled right into the bay here, and so that's going to actually amplify the storm surge. Now Port Vila is somewhat sheltered from a storm surge because it's lying in this little cove area here, but the areas around Port Vila certainly aren't sheltered in any way, shape or form. So a lot of this oceanic water will be piling up and being funneled into this region in here, similar to what we saw in Tacloban in the Philippines a couple of years ago. So the situation here, the storm surge here could be amplified further. So obviously these are the areas that are most prone to getting really badly affected by storm surge. Similarly, if we start tracking closer to a bit further south to Erromango, we've got areas here that are certainly prone to storm surge as well. This area here, Port Narvan, would certainly see a little bit of that funneling effect, especially once the winds come from the north. So once the cyclone passes this area, we might actually see the chance here for storm surge. Further still to the south, we've got Tanna, and this island here, particularly the western edge, which seems to be the most populated area of the island, would also be in line with storm surge, particularly if the cyclone travels just to their east, and they get these southwesterly winds piling the water into this region here around Saltwater Road, and the actual area here is Lenakal. That is possibly going to experience the worst of the storm surge on this particular island. So folks, there are some very low-lying areas here on these islands, and that is, I guess, the greatest concern. They're very tall islands in terms of volcanic mountains and all sorts of topographical features, but the coastline appears to be quite low-lying. And Etium further to the south, there's probably less chance of disastrous surge effects here on this island because it is fairly steep topographically. But obviously there are little settlements and that on that island that would be prone to surging, but there is possibly ample opportunity to get up on those hills and get away from that surge. The problem, of course, is if you get up on a hill, the wind speeds are exacerbated, so the wind speeds increase the higher up the hill you go. So folks, that is currently what's expected around Vanuatu. Oh, just one other island here, Tongawa, which seems to be right in the firing line, and Tongariki, which seems to be right in the firing line right now. Both these islands appear to be extremely sparsely populated. So really, folks, it's these central and southern islands in the next few hours that are of greatest concern. So on both the GFS and the European here, we can see that the system is tracking around about 7 or 8 p.m. tonight, Queensland time, is when the system gets to its closest approach to Port Vila, the capital. You can see the system lies on the GFS. It lies around about 50 to 100 kilometres to the east, but on the European it lies only 20 or 30 kilometres to the east, and so this is obviously the greatest threat. Now we've got a southerly to southwesterly wind. Now that is obviously the greatest threat for storm surge. That greatest threat for storm surge is possibly just after the eye crosses to the east of that region. Now all bets are off obviously if it crosses over the top, but at this stage if it does cross just to the east, we would see those southerly winds and southwesterly winds exacerbating the storm surge situation in Port Vila around about 7 to 10 p.m. tonight. Now, the models haven't really picked up the little stalling process that the system seems to have done in the last hour or two, so it'll be interesting to see if they do react to that in the 06 run, particularly from the GFS. The Euro isn't run until 10 p.m. tonight, but the GFS might have picked up a bit of a stall there and see what they do because of the stall. All right, but if we continue tracking this now into the other islands here, we can see that it pushes in a southerly direction or south-southwesterly direction on the Euro, and it gets to the west of Aramango and then also to the west of Tanna. We can see here that it's still Friday 7 a.m. Queensland time, and these islands are still getting raked. As we continue then to Friday 10 a.m, we see the system tracking away to the south of those islands and finally exiting Vanuatu, exiting the Vanuatu region. On the GFS forecast model this morning, we have the cyclone center located very close to Port Vila, or just as I mentioned, around about that 70 to 100 kilometers away from Port Vila to the east, around about 7 p.m. tonight. And then by 10 p.m. tonight, the system tracks away. Now, this is obviously a storm surge. You can see here the arrows pushing in from the southwest. Obviously going to be a storm surge issue then after the eye crosses to the east. Now, this computer model has the system tracking right over the top of Aramango as a Category 5, and then very, very close to Tanna, just to the west of Tanna. It does have a bit of a slowing down process here of the cyclone as it crosses those islands here. And we can see that by 7 a.m. The cyclone's located just to the west of those islands. 10 a.m. and then 1 p.m. And then by 4 p.m. it has exited the region. But you can see it really is packing a punch. Anywhere in those purple winds is just very destructive core, folks. So even though the dark purple looks pretty cool, it's all of the purple is very destructive core winds. Just to compare that for you, tropical cyclone Olwyn had a little bit of purple around it, and you saw the sorts of destruction and damage that Olwyn caused, and it was only just nudging the purple. Most of it was just red. So the fact is, the purple here signifies 50 to 60 knots, but in reality, the wind speeds are going to be much higher than that. But we can see, as I said, Port Vila this afternoon, this evening, and early tonight, and then the other two islands as we go into later tonight and early tomorrow. And then Anitium is the last one to get affected as we go into early tomorrow and into lunchtime tomorrow. Hope you all stay safe. If you do have friends and family, keep in touch with them and make sure they're staying safe in Vanuatu. Our next update here tonight will be tomorrow night. We will have a subscriber update in the morning. Thanks for watching. We'll talk again tomorrow night.